Let's talk about the case of Nnamdi Kanu, the leader of the indigenous people of Biafra, IPOB, and what's happening with his extradition drama. You probably know by now that Kanu's case is no ordinary one. It has all the drama, politics, law, international intrigue, and human rights issues wrapped into one. But let's take it step by step so we can make sense of these. Nnamdi Kanu's journey hasn't been a smooth one. He's been fighting for the independence of the southeastern region of Nigeria for years. Now, Kanu's movement, IPOB, has been pushing for a Biafran state, but Nigeria's government has labeled them as a terrorist group. Kanu, who also holds British citizenship, has been at the center of this storm. And this whole extradition case is just one chapter in a long, controversial saga. First off, let's talk about the big question. Why was Kanu's extradition to Nigeria stopped? To understand that, you need to know how the process works and where it all went wrong. You see, the Nigerian government back in 2021 asked Interpol for help in getting Kanu back to Nigeria. For those who don't know, Interpol is the International Criminal Police Organization, and they help with international law enforcement. So the Nigerian government thought they were doing everything right by following the proper procedures. They were ready to get Kanu back from where he was hiding in the UK and force him to face charges of terrorism, treason, and more. They had the legal backing and they were ready to go. But here's the catch. Interpol came back and said they hadn't formally processed any request for Kanu's extradition. Now, this is key. Interpol, which operates globally, didn't seem to back the Nigerian government's actions. And this, of course, raised a lot of eyebrows. There were claims that Kanu had been abducted, not extradited, abducted from another country and brought back to Nigeria against the law. When you break it down like that, it's hard to ignore the fact that the process was questionable from the start. You might be asking yourself, wait, if Interpol wasn't involved, how did he end up in Nigeria? Well, that's where things get murky. Some reports say that Kanu's capture wasn't clean, wasn't formal. There were no extradition proceedings, no official request processed through the proper channels, and that's why people started questioning the legality of his return. In fact, a Kenyan court actually ruled that his rendition was unconstitutional. This makes it even more suspicious. Kanu himself has been very vocal about the fact that his return wasn't lawful. He has argued that Nigeria had no legal basis for his extradition and that the process violated his rights as a dual citizen. His legal team has made it clear that this case isn't just about the crimes he's accused of. It's about how he was treated by both Nigerian and international authorities. You see, what Kanu and his supporters are arguing is that this whole extradition was a political move, not a legal one. This leads us to a bigger question. Why is Nigeria so determined to get him back? Well, the Nigerian government sees Kanu as a threat to national security. They want to silence him, make an example of him, and show that they can't let separatist movements go unchecked. But there's a twist. Many of Kanu's supporters see him as a hero, someone fighting for the rights of the Igbo people, who they feel have been marginalized in Nigeria for decades. So for them, this case isn't just about one man, it's about the whole southeastern region's struggle for justice. And as we're talking about this, let's also not forget the broader implications. This case goes beyond Kanu and Nigeria. It's about how international law enforcement works and how states interact on matters of extradition. If this case doesn't follow the proper processes, it could have serious consequences for how extraditions are handled in the future, not just in Nigeria, but across the world. Think about it. If one country can skip the normal procedures and grab someone from another country without following the law, what does that mean for international justice? This could set a dangerous precedent. What's happening now? Well, the Nigerian courts have been moving ahead with the trial. Despite all the controversy over his return, they've set dates for judgment and Kanu's team is still fighting to have the charges dropped. They're arguing that he was unlawfully detained and that the case should be thrown out. But the Nigerian government is determined to prosecute him. The government has made it clear that Kanu's actions have destabilized the country, and they want him held accountable. Meanwhile, the international community is watching closely. Some foreign governments have raised concerns about Kanu's treatment and the legality of his extradition. Human rights groups have also weighed in, saying that his rights have been violated in the process. So far, Kanu's legal team is pushing for him to be released, arguing that the extradition wasn't just flawed, it was illegal. As of now, the case isn't over. The next steps? Well, there's still that crucial court date in November where Kanu's legal team will make their final arguments. This trial could go on for months, and depending on the outcome, it could either lead to Kanu being free or facing serious charges. Either way, this case isn't just about one man, it's about national security, international law, and the rights of people fighting for what they believe in. Now, I know this is a lot to take in, but let me give you a quick recap. Interpol's role in Kanu's extradition is unclear at best. The Nigerian government wanted Kanu back, but the process was shady at worst. He's in a legal battle now, and his supporters see this as an unjust move by the Nigerian state. Meanwhile, the international community is divided on the issue. What can we expect moving forward? A lot more legal drama and probably some diplomatic fallout. If Nigeria isn't careful, this case could do more harm than good in terms of international relations. And for Kanu, well, his supporters are hoping for his release, but the Nigerian government is pushing hard for a conviction. So, we've talked about how Kanu's extradition was stopped and the murky process that surrounded his return to Nigeria. But what's really at stake here? Well, let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture. This case could have lasting effects on Nigeria's relationship with other countries, especially those that are concerned about human rights and international law. If Nigeria can just snatch up people from other countries without following proper legal procedures, it's going to raise some serious questions about the country's respect for international agreements and the rule of law. In Kanu's case, we've already seen legal challenges to how he was brought back to Nigeria. If those challenges are successful, it could send a message that Nigeria can't just act on its own without facing consequences on the global stage. Let's not forget the human rights angle here. Kanu's supporters and international human rights organizations argue that his rights have been violated from the very beginning of this saga. His detention, the conditions he's been held in, and the way he was returned to Nigeria all raise serious concerns about how individuals are treated in cases like this. His supporters believe this is part of a larger pattern of repression, not just against him, but against the southeastern region of Nigeria, where many people still feel marginalized and unheard. And let's also talk about the implications for Nigerians who have dual citizenship. If Kanu's case is handled poorly and the international community doesn't take a firm stand, it could send a dangerous message about the rights of people with dual nationality. What happens if someone is arrested abroad and brought back to Nigeria in the same way? Could other Nigerians be at risk of being snatched up in the same way? These are the questions that many people are now asking, and they deserve to be answered. So, while Kanu's supporters are rallying around him and calling for his release, others in Nigeria are looking at the bigger national security picture. The government insists that Kanu is a threat to the country, that his rhetoric has fueled violence, and that he needs to be held accountable for what they see as acts of terrorism. But again, what's being overlooked in all of this is the process. The way he was treated, the way his rights were ignored, and the way international procedures were bypassed. This is where we get into the heart of the matter. The question isn't just whether Kanu is guilty of the charges laid against him, but whether the process of extradition and arrest was legitimate in the first place. That's why the case is still ongoing. And that's why his legal team is pushing so hard to have the charges dropped. They argue that if the entire process is flawed, then the charges themselves can't stand. And here's the kicker. This isn't just about Kanu. This case has the potential to set a major precedent for how international extradition works in the future, especially in African countries. If the courts allow Nigeria to get away with ignoring legal processes and bypassing international protocols, it could lead to even more countries disregarding the rights of their citizens and ignoring the rule of law. That's why this case has caught the attention of not just Nigerians, but people all over the world. Now let's talk about how the rest of the world is watching this. Kanu's case isn't just about one man or one country. It's about the larger principles of justice and fairness that affect people everywhere. Countries that have treaties with Nigeria are paying close attention, as are international bodies like the United Nations and European Union. If Nigeria doesn't handle this case in a way that respects international law, it could hurt its reputation on the world stage. Countries may start questioning whether it's safe to cooperate with Nigeria in the future if they see this case as a sign of disregard for due process. It's not just about Kanu's extradition either. Think about it. If someone in your family had dual citizenship and got caught up in a similar situation, would you feel confident that the legal process would be followed fairly? Would you trust that they'd get a fair trial? These are the questions that people in Nigeria and abroad are starting to ask, and that's what's making this case so important. So, where do we go from here? Well, the upcoming court judgment on November 20th will be a major moment. Kanu's legal team will continue to argue that his rights were violated, and the Nigerian government will try to push forward with the charges. The world will be watching, and the outcome of this case could have ripple effects far beyond Nigeria's borders. But one thing is clear. This case isn't going to be solved easily. It's not just a legal battle. It's a battle for Nigeria's future, for its place in the international community, and for the rights of its people. How this plays out will send a message to the rest of the world about whether Nigeria is committed to respecting human rights, international law, and the rule of law. And that's why it's so important for you, the viewer, to stay informed and keep asking questions. The outcome of this case isn't just about Kanu. It's about what kind of country Nigeria wants to be moving forward. Do they want to be a country that respects the rights of its citizens and the principles of justice? Or do they want to be a country that operates on its own terms without regard for international standards? So there you have it, the whole story, from start to where we are now. This case is still very much alive, and it's one that will have major consequences for Nigeria, for international law, and for the global fight for human rights. Before I wrap up, let me remind you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends. Drop a comment below and tell me what you think about this case. Do you think Kanu's extradition was done fairly, or do you think he's being treated unjustly? I'll be reading your comments and discussing it in the next video. And as always, I'll keep you updated with the latest developments as this case unfolds. Stay tuned and see you in the next one.